We know that Wolverine often goes into this Berserker Rage and just annihilates anything that moves around him. And when he's in such a state, it's best to stay away from it. But there was one more state that Logan fell into, thanks to the machinations of first Magneto and then Genesis, the so-called heir of Apocalypse. And this Wolverine was called Feral Wolverine, and for good reason. Wolverine stayed in his feral state for the better part of at least 45 issues from the 1988 Wolverine comics. And not only did his face change, his speech itself became more animalistic, and his sense of strategy was replaced with baser bestial instincts. But all this is just the tip of the iceberg. That is the anatomy of the Feral Wolverine. And in this video, that's exactly what we're going to discuss. So without further ado, let's begin. Prologue. I think it's best to have a little background as to what happened to Logan before we start exploring his body and anatomy. So bear with me, and I'm sure you'll thank me later. So during the Fatal Attractions saga, Magneto rips out the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, leaving him grievously injured. It takes a hell of a lot of time for Wolverine to heal, and even after he's healed, he doesn't really go back to his earlier vigor. Weeks pass, and with each passing day, his desperation to be back at the Danger Room becomes more and more desperate. He wanted to prove to Xavier and the rest of the X-Men that he still belonged on the team. So while they watched from the outside, Logan fought the combat droids and pushed himself as hard as he could. But the truth was that he was taking more punishment than before, and his body didn't recover as fast as it used to. And then the final reveal. His claws were no longer adamantine. They were bone claws, like he had when his first mutation manifested. Of course, the discovery changed a lot of things for Logan. While sitting near a pond with Jubilee, who'd been asked to look after him, he admitted that for as long as he could remember, he had believed that his claws had always been metal. But if bone claws had existed before the adamantium process, then there must have been an entire part of his life that had been erased from his mind. This only meant that there were several answers still buried somewhere in his past, and Logan needed to find them, but he didn't even know which questions to ask. Later, in Wolverine number 91 from 1988, Xavier, Storm, and Beast examined Logan's post-adamantium bioscans and asked James Hudson, also known as Guardian, for help in Canada. What they found was disturbing. You see, the adamantium did much more than making Logan's skeleton stronger. In truth, it had somehow held back his natural mutation, which was a good thing for Logan because his natural mutation was bound to evolve his body and mind to become more fatal. And although the metal caused severe trauma for him psychologically, Logan's healing factor had spent years countering that damage, so he wasn't lost. However, with the adamantium gone, the restraint in Wolverine went away with it. Logan's body had begun to return to its normal evolutionary path, and even the X-Men had no idea what that could mean. I won't get into what all transpired in issues 91 to 100, but by issue 100, Tyler Dayspring, Cable's son, and better known as Genesis, was basically trying to restore Wolverine's adamantium. But this was no act of mercy or favor, of course. Genesis wanted Logan as Apocalypse's Horseman of Death, and this was the point where Wolverine's descent into Feral Wolverine really begins. The operation that mutated Wolverine instead of fixing it. So as I was saying, Genesis was not doing a favor for Wolverine by trying to give him his adamantium back. Genesis called himself the true heir to Apocalypse and wanted to serve him by rebuilding the Four Horsemen. And in order to do that, his first mission was to turn Wolverine into death. And for this purpose, he'd even gotten some adamantium from the body of another mutant named Cyber. Although this was low-grade adamantium. And the singular reason that Genesis had chosen Wolverine was that no other mutant could survive the bonding process. Logan had survived Magneto tearing the metal from his bones, so Genesis believed that he could have endured it being forced back into him as well. And I mean, he could, yeah, but the process couldn't be carried out by a bunch of losers trying to play gods. But anyway, Wolverine was restrained inside a tank with wires and tubes attached to his body. The adamantium, which Genesis had harvested from Cyber, was made to pass through a saline and electrolyte solution so that it could smoothly enter Logan's body at a molecular level. Needless to say, the process was an excruciating one, and beyond anything most people could comprehend. Maybe women could, because after all, they suffer labor pain, but with what was happening to Wolverine, this was much, much worse than any pain imaginable. Like, the metal destroyed his tissue almost as fast as his healing factor replaced it, which meant his body had to tear itself apart and repair itself at the same time. It wasn't a quick process like ripping off a band-aid. This one was going to take time, and Wolverine would have to bear this excruciating pain for as long, which I'm not surprised he did. At first, the procedure seemed to work. Life Force detected bone-level adhesion and confirmed that Logan's skeleton had begun to accept the adamantium. Genesis celebrated because he believed that he had restored Wolverine and secured his new Lord of Death. But just giving adamantium back to a mutant like Wolverine was always going to create more problems for Genesis if he didn't have a plan to make Wolverine docile and obey his commands. So he intended to erase Logan's mind and control him through brain implants. But even the Dark Riders were doubtful about this because Wolverine's healing factor could eventually repair the mental damage and erode the implants. And although Logan's body was initially accepting of the adamantium molecules, the process could not be stabilized and Logan's body started to fight back. Energy surged through the machine as the bonding unit started to suffer a severe backflow. The Life Force warned Genesis that Wolverine had begun to reject the adamantium, but sometimes villains just don't know when to stop or when to accept their defeat, and that's what causes their undoing, which is exactly what's going to happen with Genesis in a few minutes. He ordered tripling the power and redirecting every available source in the Citadel that they were present in into the machine, but more power is not the solution to everything, you know? Furthermore, the equipment that they were using was not built to handle this level of a power surge, but Genesis was blinded by his own vision and the quest of proving himself worthy. And of course, in the end, Logan's system could not hold the amount of metal that had been forced into him, and soon the adamantium was being pushed out of his pores like sweat. But some of it still remained inside his body still, and since the brain implants were stable and secure, Genesis believed he had succeeded. But then someone attacked the controls and damaged the apparatus, which was an interruption that Genesis didn't need, because it gave Logan and his body a window of opportunity that they'd been waiting for. Next thing we know, his body rejected both the metal and the implants through conscious force. So in other words, Logan had willed the adamantium out of himself because being a slave for even an hour was worse than a lifetime of pain to him. Furthermore, the machine itself exploded because it was pushed beyond its limits, and in this explosion, Hurricane and Life Force lost their lives. But what about Genesis himself? Well, this failed experiment on Logan came at a very heavy cost to him as well as Genesis. You see, Logan's body and mind became way more feral than before. He now developed long claws on his hands and feet, and his face was more bestial and animalistic than ever. Genesis had believed the adamantium would stop Wolverine's regression like it had previously done, and maybe that would have happened this time around as well. But the procedure itself had failed and pushed him even further into his feral state. Next, the mutant started hunting the Dark Riders across the Citadel. He first tore off Spine's tail and used it to kill Deadbolt. He then killed Gauntlet while Dirtnap fled and reconsidered his loyalty, which was a smart decision, I would guess. I mean, you don't want to stand with the team that's opposing Feral Wolverine. And as for Genesis, well, he soon realized that the creature he had tried to enslave had become the most dangerous thing inside his fortress. But he couldn't make an escape because, in the end, Wolverine found him near Apocalypse's resurrection chamber and attacked him with the instincts of an animal, like a lion would attack a gazelle, like a hawk would attack a rabbit. And I'm sure Genesis finally understood his mistake. In the end, Wolverine tore Genesis apart and left his body shredded on the floor. Before Logan left, he asked Sam Guthrie, aka Cannonball, to tell Cable that he was sorry about his son, and at that moment he'd been given no choice. And then when he disappeared without another word, in that moment the X-Men realized they had lost Wolverine in more ways than one. The face that stopped looking human. The most obvious difference between the regular Wolverine and his feral version is his nose, which has collapsed into a short and flattened stub, almost as if the artist forgot to draw the nose. Needless to say, this single feature changed his entire profile, because it removed much of the familiar human shape from his face and gave him what looked like the broad muzzle of an animal. His teeth have also developed into long, visible fangs, so even when he was giving ordinary expressions like a smile, he seemed ferocious. I mean, the guy literally licked Cyclops' face when the X-Men leader was knocked out during a fight in the 101st issue of the Wolverine comic. And of course, these traits were a direct result of his feral transformation. His hair became much longer, wilder, and more unkempt, almost like a mane, while his sideburns, the features that had always defined his face, had spread out more than normal. But yeah, he still wore that classic yellow and blue costume, so at least there was some Logan left in him. In fact, you'd see him in the next entry, a man who had become feral. But that doesn't mean he's lost his mind completely or that he'd become completely animalistic. To draw a comparison, he was still more Logan than Dr. Banner became whenever he turned into the Hulk. Moving on, we can't forget his bandana. Given how much of his face had changed, the artist and Logan decided it was time to give up the cowl in favor of a bandana that he wore across his altered face and beneath all that hair. The very simple reason why Logan made this decision is that the man was very much aware of what had happened to him and how his appearance had changed, but that did not mean he should allow the entire world to see it and come to know about it. This guy was not some attention-seeking bitch, nor was he someone who wanted to scare people for no reason. But now let's talk about how Genesis's failed procedure affected Logan's mind and how he treated people around him. We know that he still remembered he was an X-Man, more or less, but did it mean he was good to rely on other folks? I mean, he was never the champion of socializing or anything, but he still wouldn't have hurt people for no reason. But how did the procedure affect his psyche and his behavior? Let's find out. Wolverine's instinct replaced his keen sense of strategy. Although Wolverine's body rejected that adamantium and he suffered immense pain and more profound damage, or maybe the greater change had been done to the mind. The brain implants and their forced removal basically pushed him further into the feral state, and now he was living his life through animalistic instinct rather than human strategy. And this was clearly seen in Wolverine number 102. In this story, which is also called Unspoken Promises, we see Charles Xavier watching from inside the mansion as Logan slips out of the Xavier Institute and heads to the underbellies of New York City. He crossed the rooftops with the ease of an animal that had returned to its familiar hunting grounds. But also, like an animal, this new Logan had neither a plan nor mission nor understanding about what he wanted to do or where he wanted to go. He followed people's movements and decided his own direction based on sound and scent, which meant the instincts that had once just aided his mind in strategizing his plans had now begun to replace it completely. Nearby, a mother put her teenage son to bed and gave him the necklace, a medallion she had worn around her own neck. Once she leaves the room, however, the boy gets dressed, takes a pistol from beneath his mattress, climbs out the fire escape. The kid then meets a friend who is basically a drug dealer. Meanwhile, Logan soon reached the street and came face to face with a blind homeless man in a wheelchair, the boy that we met earlier. His mother passed them, and when she noticed Logan, his altered face terrified her. But she still offered him a coin, and this small act of humanity made home in Logan's feral heart. You see, even in this state, he could sense and remember an act of kindness. Meanwhile, a couple left a nearby church with their baby as a drug deal was taking place behind a chain-linked fence. But there was a gunfight between the two parties, and a stray bullet lodged itself in the blind man's wheelchair. Logan was clearly pissed. As the poor couple from the church tried to help the now wounded blind man, the drug dealer friend shot them both, and Logan had had enough. Now, the former Wolverine might have assessed the scene, protected the civilians, and taken the fastest route to calm things down. But this wasn't the former Logan now, was it? Just like a feral animal, he saw violence, identified the predator, and attacked. There was little to no thought behind any of this. In fact, the man was now reacting to things instead of thinking his actions through. He leaps on the drug dealer and does quick work of it, but the kid from earlier shoots Logan from behind. Big mistake, kiddo. You've got no idea what you just got yourself into. And just as we thought, Logan turns and pursues him all the way to a train station where the boy fires again, and again he backs across the platform while Logan keeps on charging at him despite the wounds. Eventually, the kid falls onto the tracks as a train was coming towards it. But, my friends, this was the moment where we see Logan's humanity was not truly lost. He noticed something on the necklace around the boy's neck and recognized it as the one worn by the woman from earlier. Next thing we know, Logan is jumping onto the tracks and bringing the fallen teenager to safety. He then sniffs the boy and his belongings and becomes sure that the kid was, in fact, that lady's son. And Logan spares his attacker, despite every muscle, every hair, every drop of blood in his body telling him not to. And that's proof that Logan may have gone feral. The man did not lose his mind entirely, and he was just guided a bit more by instincts than you and I. His voice was becoming an animalistic sound. Now, another very crucial change happening to Logan was the change in his voice. So, in the 103rd issue of the same comic, we see that his speech became slightly rougher with difficulty speaking in large or complex sentences and a difficulty in speaking words clearly, and even his vocabulary was affected negatively. I mean, it's not like Logan was ever a master of the English language, but you know what I mean, right? His words had started to become more like growls, and this only worsens as the comic moves forward. And proof of this was that his dialogue in issue number 103 and beyond were presented in jagged lettering, which is proof that his speech was not normal like a human being's. For instance, we see similar jagged letters or italicized letters when someone evil like Mr. Sinister or Azazer or Null speaks. Even their dialogues are not shown in black letters on a white background because there's something inherently different about their voices. The man was buried, not destroyed. So even in his feral state, Wolverine's emotional memory, loyalty, and the instinct to protect innocent people had survived with it. In the 101st issue, the X-Men were fighting Ozymandias and his stone lookalikes of the X-Men. And Ozymandias had filled the area with so much psionic static that nobody could reach Cyclops in time. When he learned about this from Jean, he immediately flung into action. As Scott fell into a chasm, Logan threw himself after him and ignored the battle above. Scott had lost the protection of his ruby quartz visor, so his eyes fires fired their full concussive force. As he dropped through the helix, he tried to use those optic blasts like retro rockets, but they weren't powerful enough to stop his fall. So he then aimed at the rock wall and tried to cut a chute into it, hoping the friction would slow him down. Logan, meanwhile, had regressed too far for this intricate of a plan. He narrowed his body through the instinct alone, because he understood that in order to save his friend and former colleague, he needed more speed. Above them, Ozymandias was still in control of them and stone copies of Magneto, Hurricane, and Wolverine through his telekinesis. Those constructs tore granite from the cavern and hurled it at Jean, Iceman, Cannonball, and the others. But Logan paid no attention to any of it, because for him, Scott was all that mattered. Scott was the mission. Then Scott struck an inch of projection of Scheist, and the impact affected a section of his brain that had suffered damage before, and his body began to tumble. That increased the resistance against the air and slowed him by the smallest amount, but it gave Logan the opening he needed. Logan reached Scott and caught him before driving his claws into the steep wall, and both men stopped with a jerk. But Logan couldn't hear Scott breathing, and as a last-ditch effort to restore his friend, or maybe as an act of love to a friend he had thought he had lost, Logan licked Scott across the chin. Cyclops was awake at once, but he did ask Logan what the hell he was doing. Now, this isn't the only instance when Logan saved someone. As I mentioned earlier, he did spare his attackers simply because the guy's mom had been kind to the feral mutant. Now, maybe Logan was in the process of losing his humanity with each passing day, but he wasn't really losing his conscience as a human, as an X-Man, and that's why I said in the beginning itself that the man was buried, not destroyed. But at this point, I want to address the great misconception that people usually have, and it has something to do with his bone claws. The bone claws were not part of the feral transformation. Now, contrary to what many people believe, Logan's transformation brought many changes to him, but his bone claws were not really part of this feral Wolverine form. I mean, as you may have understood from this video thus far, his bone claws were revealed even to himself after Magneto ripped the adamantium out of his body in issue number 75. But even now, he wasn't really feral. There was a possibility that he might go over to the dark side, which doesn't really happen anyway, by the way, but the bone claws were part of him since the first time they came out of his hands. In fact, Wolverine's transformation was the result of Genesis messing with him in the 100th issue, and nothing else. So if anyone tells you that his bone claws were in fact part of his feral Wolverine transformation, they're simply wrong. His humanity returned before his appearance did. Curiously enough, we always think that feral Wolverine's appearance is synonymous to his psyche, but that's not really the truth, because he found his humanity back even before his appearance returned to normalcy. And I'll explain. So, by the 105th issue of the Wolverine comic, New York was burning because of Onslaught's wrath unleashed upon it. But everything that could be done to take care of the threat was being done, and superhero teams like the X-Men, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and several other individual heroes were already engaging this most psionic evil on the planet, born from the darkest parts of Professor X and Magneto. Logan knew he had no business at Ground Zero. I mean, this was a battle for people who could move trucks with their minds or fire bolts and streams of energy from their eyes. This meant that Wolverine could invest his time and energy in other places, like helping ordinary people from being collateral damage. A boy named Sean had become trapped on the 6th floor of a burning building after he went back for Mr. Winky. Logan first assumed Mr. Winky was another person, but after he climbed through the window and found Sean beneath the bed, he learned that it was the boy's teddy bear. Sean didn't trust him at first because Logan wore a mask and was not a firefighter, so Wolverine removed it and told him how he was a superhero. The ceiling then collapsed and blocked their route back to the window. Smoke filled the hallway and Logan could neither see nor follow a scent well enough to find the stairs. That was when a strange old man appeared inside the fire and extended a staff towards him. The man guided Logan and Sean towards the stairwell, although his directions offered little comfort. When Logan asked how he could see through the smoke, the old man said he had a knack for it, which explained, absolutely nothing. Logan soaked his shirt, wrapped it around Sean, and told the boy to breathe through the wet cloth, and then he carried him through the 6 floors of fire. By the time Wolverine reached the street, his hair and flesh had burned away, but thankfully his healing factor restored the damage within moments, although Logan admitted that a power that blocked pain would have been useful as well. A firefighter called him a hero, but Logan rejected the praise and pointed towards the men who had faced fires every day. He then asked to be soaked again because the old man remained inside, and Logan owed him his life. Before he returned, Sean gave back his mask and asked whether he was Captain America, and Logan told him that his nickname was Wolverine, though the boy still seemed unsure who that was. But we do, kiddo. We know who this is. The man, the myth, the legend. Now, this rescue proved that Logan's humanity was not gone, but Stick wanted him to understand why. Oh, yeah, the old man was Stick, the same man who once trained Elektra as well as the man without fear, aka Daredevil. Wolverine found the old man on the roof and tried to force him out of the building, and Stick answered by striking with his staff and asking whether Logan had lived as an animal for so long that he could no longer use his mind. After several blows, Wolverine finally recognized him as Elektra's teacher and the master of the Chaste. But yeah, the one thing you must notice is that Stick had died. So this was Stick alright, but he wasn't alive, and Logan as well managed to figure it out that Stick wasn't really a normal living man. He seemed to vibrate from another plane, perhaps in a state he had reached before death. But Stick had not come to discuss his own condition, he had come for Wolverine. Logan believed Stick would finish what Elektra had started and place him back on the path towards humanity. He expected some lessons about pride and humility and fear and courage, but no, Stick dismissed all that and told Wolverine that neither he nor Elektra could turn Logan back into a man, and anyone who claimed otherwise would simply be lying to him or were misguided themselves. All that anyone could do for him was to point him towards a path he may or may not take, but he would have to make this journey alone, and this was the part that Logan had been refusing to concede. You see, he'd been running away from responsibilities. He blamed Magneto for tearing the adamantium out of his body and for everything else that followed after. Stick told him Magneto had planted fear inside him and damaged his spirit when he ripped the adamantium out, but his total surrender, this refusal to get back up on his own, this was all Logan's doing and only he could undo it. And if we're being honest, Logan did allow himself to fall into his animalistic nature because maybe, just maybe, he didn't feel like he was the best at what he did without the adamantium, and maybe giving up felt easier than fighting his way back. And I don't really want to blame the man for being a bit scared, after all, he suffered a lot. Anyway, Stick then told him something Logan really needed to hear from someone else, that he wouldn't be an animal as long as he tried not to be one. As the roof gave way beneath him, Stick pointed into the smoke and told Wolverine to jump. Logan asked why he should trust him, but then realized that trust itself was a choice, and a man always had a choice, and Logan chose to leap. He passed through the smoke and caught the fire ladder on the other side, and in doing so, Stick had not cured Wolverine or restored the parts of him that Genesis had messed up, but Stick did help Logan with his psyche. He stopped Logan from blaming his adamantiumless body, Magneto, or fate, or anything else for his current status. In the end, Human Torch arrived and told him how all the superheroes were gathering at the Four Freedoms Plaza to plan the final assault on Onslaught, and Logan makes a joke about Human Torch and heat. A very dad joke, I must point out. But, you know, Logan was back. The Feral Wolverine was nearly gone. How he became normal again. During a space mission with the X-Men, Apocalypse abducted him and replaced him with a Skrull who infiltrated the team. Logan was then forced to fight Sabretooth for the title of Horseman of Death. Now, Logan understood that he must win this fight, not because he wanted to become Death, but because he didn't want Sabretooth to become Death. He believed that he might at least be able to resist Apocalypse's control, but Sabretooth with that kind of raw power would become uncontrollable and would really bring about hell on Earth. So Wolverine defeated him and accepted the role of one of Apocalypse's horsemen for himself. Apocalypse then succeeded where Genesis had failed and bonded adamantium back onto Logan's skeleton. As Death, Wolverine carried out several missions for Apocalypse and even fought the Hulk. Meanwhile, the Skrull who had taken his place tried to drive a wedge between the X-Men and Xavier. Apocalypse eventually ordered the real Wolverine to kill the imposter, which exposed the truth. Once the X-Men learned that their teammate had been replaced, they found Logan and tried to bring him back. Wolverine fought them with full force under Apocalypse's control, but Psylocke, Archangel, Kitty Pryde, and Jubilee managed to reach the man beneath the death persona and helped him to break free. So in the end, Logan regained his adamantium and escaped Apocalypse's control. But there was little time to recover because soon afterwards, he watched Colossus sacrifice his life to eradicate the legacy virus. And that was how Logan lost and found his adamantium and the changes that this lengthy process caused. If you liked this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to ring that notification bell so that when we have more X-Men videos, you find out first. Stay safe and have a great day.